The Constitutional Court will soon hear a case about whether the Gauteng Department of Education has the power to overrule a decision taken by a school governing body. The school in question is Rivonia Primary, and it's in relation to the admission of a grade 1 pupil. Now, Nikki Stein from Section 27 joins us. She is an attorney at the eNCA. Thanks very much for coming in this evening, Nikki. Now, you're putting forward in this case that this issue is not just about one pupil at Rivonia Primary, that it has huge ramifications for the rest of the country. Just explain that to us.
It definitely has far bigger ramifications for the country. We're working on a case at the moment representing 54 parents in the Fochville community who want to have their children educated at Fochville High School, which is close to where they live. The school has adopted an Afrikaans language policy, and these clients' children seek English medium instruction. What's happening is that they can't get into Fochville High School and are having to travel 25 kilometers every day to school in Carltonville just so that they can get their English medium instruction. It's another example of a school governing body which has adopted policies which are not in line with the Constitution, not in line with the South African Schools Act. And unfortunately, it's one of many cases where SGBs are using power to act in ways that undermine the right to basic education.
And particularly if we look at the Rivonia Primary School case, some would see this as a loss for one child, but a victory for all the other children in the same class. Surely that's democracy at its best.
I think what we need to remember is that schools are not all on an equal level. Unfortunately, the apartheid system has left us in a space where some schools are very well resourced, some are under-resourced, and unfortunately the well-resourced schools are operating with smaller classes, more teachers and more resources. And what's happening is that those schools are unfortunately closing their doors to poorer learners. The SGB should have the power to govern schools. The SGB should be adopting admissions policies and language policies, but they should do so in a way that gives effect to the rights to equality and dignity and the right to basic education. And where they don't do that, it is the duty and not only the power of provincial education departments to step in and make sure that they comply with their obligations.
Isn't the system flawed in the first place? Sure, you want school governing bodies comprising parents and community members to participate, but surely they have the interests of their own children and their immediate community at heart rather than the larger community, wouldn't you say?
The law actually says that school governing bodies don't only represent the learners at the school and their parents. School governing bodies have got a duty to represent everyone in the broader community. So taking us back to the Fochville case, where the school governing body has adopted an Afrikaans language policy, that obviously only represents one portion of the community whose voices must be heard, but they must be heard at the same time as everybody else in that community who also seek education for their children. A place in school in the language of their choice as they're entitled to under the Constitution.
Nikki, I do want to move on to the Education Department evaluation report that was released this week that showed the inadequacy of teachers to inculcate basic skills analysis in the foundation phase children. What is your take on immediate interventions that can be made to mitigate the effects of that?
I think that teacher training is essential. And I think teacher training in all areas is essential, not only in ordinary schools and ordinary education. There are some terrifying statistics about teacher skills, for example, in Braille literacy or sign language fluency. Teachers who are teaching blind children to read Braille can't necessarily read Braille properly themselves. I think that there is a recognition by the Department of Education that there is a lack of skills. The Minister of Basic Education recognized this in her budget speech yesterday. And it is something that needs to be urgently addressed. Teachers need to be educated in the syllabus that they're teaching their children. They need to be told how to convey things to their children. And we've got to make sure, it's not just teachers or just textbooks or just classrooms that will guarantee the right to basic education. It's all of these components working together.
Nikki, how do you guarantee that in a schooling system where in the mainstream system, where children without learning disabilities are being neglected and who cannot learn the basic skills like reading, writing, adding and subtracting, for example, how do we balance that with the needs of this minority of special needs learners whose teachers require a completely different kind of training, don't they?
I think that they require additional training, but these learners have got the equal right to education, so they have exactly the same entitlement as learners learning in ordinary schools. Of course that will require additional resources, of course that will require additional training for teachers, but minority groups are protected under the Constitution as well, and those resources are available. There is a budget for special needs education, there is a policy on special needs education, and we need to ensure this policy has been in place since 2001 and it actually needs to be made into binding law so that these learners do enjoy, in fact, the same entitlements as other learners.
Nikki Stein, thanks very much for coming in to talk to us.
News that moves. eNCA.com.